I was staring at the ceiling tiles when my phone lit up again, the monitor by my bed keeping time with a steady high-strung beep, the kind of rhythm that makes you measure every breath. The nurse had just tightened the IV and told me to rest, but the screen drew my eyes anyway. My father's name filled the display, and for a heartbeat I thought maybe he was finally calling to say he was on his way, that he'd found a flight, that I wasn't alone in that cold humming room. Instead, a message arrived, dry-clipped like a joke told to the wrong audience, suggesting that if my luck ran out, I might finally be worth talking about. The words didn't sting so much as settle like a weight placed where a bruise already lived. Outside, dawn pressed a gray hand against the window. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and warm plastic. I could hear a cart rattle down the hall, a door hiss shut somewhere, a laugh that didn't belong to me. I set the phone face down on the tray and listened to the machine announce that I was still here. In that moment, I understood I would have to decide what being still here meant. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and if you've ever had to choose peace over approval, tap like and subscribe so this story finds the people who need it. My name is Avery, and I grew up in a town where we learned to say please and thank you, and to walk casseroles across the street whenever sirens stopped too close to someone's porch. We were taught that kindness was proof you belonged, and that belonging mattered more than anything. My parents were the kind of couple who loved matching sweaters in December and group photos under the oak tree, the kind of people who signed their holiday cards with love and laughter as if those two things came standard like power windows. We didn't have much when I was little, but we had tidy lawns and a church raffle every spring, and there was always a way to make something look better than it felt. I kept my head down, collected straight A's, fixed the family computer when it hissed and stalled, and found my lane in code, because logic never asked me to guess how it wanted to be loved. When a tech firm in the city hired me fresh out of college, the offer felt like a door swinging open into a room full of light, and I walked through it with both hands out, thinking I could carry everyone with me. Moving from a hand-me-down life into a skyline of glass was its own kind of classroom. Suddenly, my days were sprinting stand-up security patches and late-night takeout, and my nights were a calculus of budgets, direct deposits, and polite phone calls that turned into obligations. The first time I paid a lingering bill for my parents, it felt like returning a favor the universe forgot to settle. The second time I told myself it was temporary. Then came my dad's truck repair, my mother's just a small update to the kitchen, and my brother Chase's rent after another job slipped through his hands, and pretty soon I was covering a mortgage on a house I didn't live in and watching utilities auto-draft from my account like seasons turning. We stayed camera-ready, matching outfits, clinking glasses, while I learned to make my voice soft whenever I asked about payback, because anything firmer was called ungrateful. Family helps family, my father liked to say, and the way he said it sounded like a rule I should have known by heart. The longer I stood in that gap, the more I understood the quiet math of it. When my name appeared, things got approved. When my money moved, the tension in my parents' shoulders eased. When I hesitated, their expressions hardened, as if I'd broken a promise. I told myself they meant well, that they were tired, that they had given me years, and I was giving a few back. But generosity turned into schedule into expectation, and expectation into a kind of script where I hit my marks and everyone else forgot their lines. At work, I built systems that kept strangers safe. At home, I kept people I loved insulated from the consequences that might have taught them to stand up straight. I didn't notice how thin I'd become until the day my body made the decision to slow me down, and I couldn't tell if the cold that climbed into my bones was the infection or the realization that I was the only one holding the net. When the cough that I'd been ignoring got teeth and the fever stacked hours into a blur, I still believed a familiar voice would rise up when I called. That's how we're trained, I suppose, to think help is a number you dial. The ER was bright and efficient and full of hands that knew what to do. The diagnosis came fast, and the word sepsis landed like a dropped pan, noisy and unavoidable. They admitted me the sensors found their places, and strangers told me they would keep watch. I sent one text to my brother, one to my mother, one to my father, then put the phone where I could see it, so hope had a place to sit. Hours later, when my father's message finally arrived, casual, showy the sun behind him, a club in his fist, a drink curving in the corner of the frame, it carried a caption that left no room for misunderstanding. That's where I'm going to leave us for now. A hospital room humming with machines, a phone that has just chosen a side, and a daughter who hears for the first time how quiet it can be when the people you've carried decide they don't need to show up. The hours in the ICU blurred together, nurses moving like quiet metronomes machines, singing their steady, urgent chorus. My chest felt heavy each breath, like pulling air through water. I remember watching the sunlight fade across the tile floor, thinking that sooner or later someone I loved would walk through that door. They didn't. The nurse asked if I wanted her to call someone for me. I shook my head, reached for my phone, and tried again on my own. Dad's number rang twice before it went to voicemail. Mom's did the same. When Chase finally answered, his voice was groggy. "What's up?" "It's early," he mumbled. My throat was raw, but I managed to say, "I'm in the ICU." "Chase, they think it's serious. Can you get Mom and Dad and come here?" He was silent for a moment before sighing. "Yeah, that's not going to happen. They're in Vegas this weekend. Dad's at some golf thing. Mom's at a spa. I'm here too, actually." For a second, I thought I misheard him. "You're in Vegas too?" He hesitated, then said, "Yeah, it's all prepaid, you know. Flights, hotels. You'll be fine, Avery. You're tough." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at my reflection in the black screen until the nurse came back to check the monitors. She adjusted something near my arm, smiling softly, unaware that my chest felt like it was caving in. Hours passed before I heard my phone buzz again. This time it wasn't a call, it was a text. A photo from Dad, the kind that made its own noise even on silent. He was standing on a golf course with 3 men in polos, the desert behind them, glowing gold. The caption read, "Good times with great friends. Life's too short." I scrolled through the photos one after another, my mother clinking glasses at a brunch table, my brother flashing a grin beside a pool, and that's when the next message came through. "Maybe dying will make you interesting." No winking emoji, no laughter, just words that sat there like a challenge. The room suddenly felt smaller. I could hear the steady alarm of the heart monitor syncing with the thud of my pulse. For a moment I thought I might cry. Instead, I felt something shift, quiet but unmistakable. Lying there with tubes in my arms, I began to see every favor for what it had been. Not love, not gratitude, just transaction. The pattern stretched years behind me, me wiring money, them spending it, and no one saying thank you. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was a credit line. That realization didn't come like a thunderclap. It was softer, colder, the way truth often is when it finally lands. I closed my eyes and made 2 silent promises I would survive this, and when I did, they would never live off me again. By morning, the fever had eased a little. The nurse said my vitals looked steadier. I nodded, but my mind was already working. I reached for my phone not to call my family this time, but to start untangling myself from them. My banking app opened to a familiar list of automatic transfers, my parents' mortgage, Chase's car insurance, the credit card they used for emergencies that always meant vacations or shopping sprees. One by one, I canceled them. Mortgage payment gone. Car insurance terminated. Credit card reported stolen. Each click echoed through the quiet like a heartbeat finally keeping its own rhythm. When the financial side was clean, I called Sonia Patel. She'd managed my investments for years and knew better than to ask too many questions. "Avery," she said, her voice soft, "I heard you've been sick. Are you okay?" I swallowed. Getting there. "I need to make some changes, remove my parents and my brother as beneficiaries on every account effective immediately." She hesitated. "That's a serious step. You sure?" "Yes," I said. "Completely." Then I called Martin Ellison, my lawyer. "Martin, I want to revoke the power of attorney we set up years ago," I told him. "Rewrite the will. None of them are to be included anymore." He didn't press. "Understood. I'll prepare the documents." By the time I ended the calls, I felt drained but strangely clear. The drip beside my bed hummed softly, the monitor keeping time. It was almost funny in a grim way how easily the empire of handouts could be dismantled. A few phone calls, a few keystrokes, and the endless well they'd drawn from was gone. I imagined Chase handing over that credit card at a blackjack table, watching the screen flash declined. I imagined Mom switching on the kitchen lights and finding darkness. Dad at the golf resort front desk trying to charge the room and being told the card was no good. It wasn't about revenge. It was balance. That evening my phone rang again. Dad's name glowed on the screen. I let it buzz twice before answering. His voice was tight. "There's something wrong with the card. It was declined at dinner." I kept my tone calm. "That's strange. Maybe call the bank." He exhaled sharply. "They said it was reported stolen. Did you do that?" "Yes," I said, "while I was lying here in the ICU and you were golfing in Vegas." There was a silence so long I could hear my own breath. "Avery, be reasonable. We're stuck here without money. I thought you paid for the trip yourselves," I said quietly. "That's what you told me." Then I ended the call. 5 minutes later, Chase called. His tone was louder, his patience shorter. "What the hell, Avery? You stranded us. The hotel says we need to pay for another night and we can't. Mom's losing it. Maybe pawn something I said, or call one of your business partners." He let out a bitter laugh. "You think you're better than us now." I didn't answer. "You'll regret this," he snapped, then hung up. I set the phone aside and leaned back against the pillows. The sound of the monitors had faded into background noise. For the first time in years, my world was quiet enough to think. Later that night, I turned the phone face down and fell into the deepest sleep I'd had in a long time. The next morning, a nurse helped me sit up. She smiled when I managed a few steps toward the window. The city outside looked different, cleaner somehow. I checked my phone once more. Dozens of missed calls, unread messages, voicemails stacking like junk mail. I didn't listen to them. The fever was breaking, and so was everything that had kept me tethered. By the time I was discharged 3 days later, my body was weak, but my mind was steady. I walked out into the spring air, the sunlight sharp and warm on my face, and I knew exactly what came next. The first part, survival, belonged to the doctors. The second, freedom, was mine to finish. That night back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and made a list. Utilities canceled, internet canceled, gas and power bills still in my name canceled, even the family phone plan that had followed Chase through college done. I worked methodically the way I would debug a stubborn system at work until every thread tying me to their comfort was gone. When the last confirmation email came through, I sat in the glow of the screen and let the silence settle around me. Somewhere out west, the lights in their house would flicker off. The warmth would thin, the Wi-Fi would die, and they would realize the foundation beneath them was gone. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, decisive, like cutting a cord that had been stretched too thin for too long. The next chapter of their story was already unfolding, though I didn't need to see it to know how it would go. Calls, panic, maybe anger. For now, I only knew this: the woman who had entered the hospital begging for love was gone. The one walking out had stopped asking. And in the stillness of that new beginning, I knew the calls would start again soon, and when they did, I'd be ready. When the hospital discharged me, spring sunlight hit my face with that sharp warmth that only feels earned after a long illness. I'd lost weight. My hands trembled when I carried my bag, but the air itself felt clean. Inside my apartment, the quiet was thicker than I remembered. Every sound, running water, the hum of the refrigerator felt like proof that I was back in my own space and control. That evening I made tea, sat by the window, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. The first call came before midnight. Dad's number glowed across the screen again. I almost ignored it, but habit won. His voice was tight and quick. "Avery, we need to talk. Something's wrong with the card again. It's declined everywhere." I let him finish before saying, "That's odd. Maybe call the bank." He sighed hard. "We did. They said it was reported stolen. Did you do that?" I looked out over the streetlights flickering below my window. "Yes, I did," I said quietly. "While I was lying in the ICU and you were golfing." The line went silent, just breath between us. "Avery, you can't do this. We're stuck here without money." "I thought you paid for the trip yourselves," I said. "You told me that." Then I hung up. 5 minutes later, Chase called. His voice was sharp from the start. "What the hell, Avery? You left us stranded. The hotel's demanding payment. Mom's losing it." I said nothing at first, just listened to him breathe on the other end. Maybe pawn something, I said finally, or ask one of your business partners for help. He swore under his breath. You think you're better than us now? You'll regret this. The line went dead again, leaving only the quiet hum of my apartment. By morning, the messages had multiplied, missed calls, voicemails full of noise. I didn't listen to any of them. I opened my laptop instead. The next step was simple utilities. The electric bill in my name canceled, gas canceled, internet gone. Even their phone plan, which I'd been paying for since Chase was in college, was terminated. One by one, the digital cord snapped. I closed the laptop and sat there for a long time, listening to the faint tick of the wall clock. Somewhere their house was already dimming into silence. That afternoon, a new voicemail came in. I let it play through the speaker as I made coffee. Avery. My mother's voice began shaky and low. The bank says they're starting foreclosure proceedings. Do you know what that means? You can't just... I deleted it before she finished. The next one followed minutes later, Dad. Again, his tone smoother this time, almost rehearsed. We all say things we don't mean when we're angry. Don't let one bad moment ruin everything. One bad moment. As if the years of expectation and neglect were a misunderstanding. I deleted that one too. The days that followed settled into an odd rhythm. Morning quiet scattered calls by afternoon, guilt by evening. The messages shifted from pleading to angry to self-pitying. You think you're better than us, Chase growled in one. You'll see how it feels when no one's around for you. Another time, Mom whispered, Sweetheart, we made mistakes, but you can't just leave your family behind. I listened once, then erased every word. By the third day, I'd stopped answering altogether. The silence unsettled them. It didn't take long before they found other ways to reach me. One night, Paige sent a screenshot from Chase's social media. A shaky video showed him and Dad arguing with a hotel clerk, captions flashing, "Some people don't understand loyalty." I almost laughed. Loyalty had always been their favorite word, right after obligation. The clip stayed online for less than a day before being deleted, but the message was clear. They wanted sympathy. When that didn't work, they tried shame. 3 days later, my phone buzzed again, this time with a new number. When I picked up, a woman introduced herself as Kayla, saying she was a friend of my mother's. "Marianne's falling apart," she began. "She just needs her daughter's support." Her voice softened, practiced. "She's right here listening." I let a beat of silence stretch before asking Kayla, "Is she sitting next to you?" There was a pause. "Yes." "Then tell her goodbye," I said, and ended the call. The next morning, everything moved online. My phone lit up with notifications. Chase again, this time on social media, posting long paragraphs about family betrayal. He wrote that I'd abandoned our parents, left them homeless after all they'd done. For a moment, my stomach tightened, but then the comments began to roll in. Old classmates, co-workers, even a few distant cousins stepped in. "Didn't your dad post pictures from Vegas while she was in the hospital?" someone asked. Another added screenshots of their golf trip. Within hours, the post had turned into a wildfire of truth. Chase deleted it before nightfall, but it was too late. The story had already traveled. The harassment that followed was quieter, but closer. Blocked numbers calling in the night, knocks at my apartment door that faded before I reached the peephole, the occasional scrape of footsteps retreating down the hall. My building's night guard Hank started checking the cameras whenever I came downstairs. "You've got people showing up asking for you," he said one afternoon. "Older couples said they're family." My throat tightened. "If they come again, don't let them up." He nodded. Already didn't. 2 days later, I saw them with my own eyes. I stepped off the elevator and found Dad and Mom in the lobby, arguing with Hank through the glass doors. My mother's expression changed the second she saw me, relief mixed with performance. "Avery, please," she called out, "just 5 minutes. We can fix this." I stood still, my heart pounding steady. "Security," I said calmly. "These people are harassing me. Please escort them out." The guards moved in without hesitation. My parents shouted my name as they were ushered toward the street, but I didn't look back. The doors closed behind them, sealing the quiet, like a room finally catching its breath. That evening, I sat on the couch, lights low, and realized there was no anger left, only stillness. The calls had turned to noise I could tune out. The guilt they'd relied on had lost its charge. What remained was silence, thick but bearable. For a few days the quiet held. Then Thursday came, and with it a fresh wave of pressure. They no longer reached out directly. Instead, messages arrived from strangers and distant relatives. "They just need a second chance," one text read. "No one's perfect," said another. Each message carried the same edge beneath the words, "Give them back their lifeline or else." The "or else" arrived that weekend. Paige sent me screenshots again. Chase had posted an old photo of me from college, beer in hand, captioned, "Some people act high and mighty, but they've always been reckless." Within minutes, my inbox filled with comments from strangers picking apart my life, my looks, my work. But what they didn't realize was that Paige and a few friends from the tech world were already tracing the accounts, collecting proof. By sunrise, the post was gone, replaced by a half-hearted apology about family misunderstandings. I saved the screenshots anyway. That night, there was another knock at my door. This time, it was softer, 3 measured taps. When I opened it, the hallway was empty except for a manila envelope lying flat on the floor. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a foreclosure notice. The house they'd loved more than me was gone. Hours later, the calls started again. This time, the voices weren't angry, they were panicked. "Avery. Please," Dad said in one voicemail. "The bank says we have weeks before they take everything. If you could just co-sign." I stopped listening. Another message came an hour later from a number I didn't recognize. It was a link to a fundraising page titled, "Help a Family Betrayed by Their Own." The description painted me as unstable, vindictive, heartless. But they'd made one mistake. It was public. Within a day, people I knew from work and beyond had found it. The comments turned fast. "You should be ashamed. She's the one you abandoned." The page disappeared less than 48 hours later. By then, something inside me had gone still. The fury that had fueled me through those first days was gone, replaced by clarity. I was done reacting, done defending, done answering. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Families like mine didn't let go. They regrouped. And when they did, it would take something stronger than silence to make them stop. That thought stayed with me as I sat in the dim light of my apartment, the city outside whispering through the windows. I didn't know when the next line would be crossed, only that it would be soon, and when it happened, I wouldn't face it alone. For the first time in years, the quiet felt heavy enough to keep. I spent my evenings with the lights dimmed, phone face down, the air thick with a kind of calm that didn't depend on anyone's approval. I knew better than to expect it would last. People like my father didn't disappear. They regrouped. The first sign came on a Friday afternoon when Paige texted me a string of screenshots. Chase had posted again, this time with a new caption about forgiveness and family misunderstandings. The post itself was tame, but I knew what it meant. They were preparing for the next act, one that would move beyond words. That night, the elevator buzzed on my floor. Hank's voice came through the intercom a few seconds later. "Avery got another pair downstairs asking for you. Say they're your parents again." I closed my laptop slowly. "Don't let them up, Hank." His tone softened. "Already told them that. They're sitting in the lobby, though. Want me to call the police?" I thought about it for a beat, then said, "Not yet. Just keep the cameras rolling." I waited by the window, listening to the hum of the building's heating vents until my phone started vibrating again. Another voicemail from Dad. His voice was tight, but measured, like he was trying to sound reasonable. "Avery, we just want to talk. We didn't mean for things to get so out of hand. Let's fix this before it goes too far." I deleted it without listening to the rest. A second voicemail followed from Mom, more emotional, her words tumbling over themselves. "We're losing everything, honey. The house, the car, everything. Please don't do this to us." The phrasing struck me. "Don't do this to us," as if their downfall were something I was inflicting rather than the result of choices they'd made long before I stopped paying for them. I deleted that one too. By the end of the weekend, the knocking started again. Different patterns, different times. Sometimes just before dawn, sometimes mid-afternoon, a short series of taps that stopped the moment I moved toward the door. I started keeping a log of the times and recording every voicemail. Paige urged me to stay somewhere else, but I refused. My apartment was the first space I'd ever fully owned, and I wasn't going to surrender it to intimidation. When the pounding escalated one night, hard, frantic, angry enough to rattle the chain lock, I called Hank. He was there in under a minute, his voice low as he handled whoever stood on the other side. The cameras caught only their silhouettes before they turned and disappeared into the stairwell. The next morning, my phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. It was a link to a new page, another public post this time, a fundraising site. The headline read, "Help a family betrayed by their own." The description painted me as unstable, vindictive, ungrateful. They'd even uploaded one of my old photos from a company event, cropped and captioned to look like a press image of a villain. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the screen until the absurdity of it all sank in. Within hours, people from my professional network had found the page. The comments filled up faster than they could delete them. "You should be ashamed," one wrote. "Abandoning your daughter in the hospital isn't something you come back from." The page vanished less than 2 days later. I thought that might finally end it. I was wrong. Early Tuesday morning, a letter arrived, no return address. Just my name written in my mother's looping handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded twice. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. "We're sorry for the things that were said," it began. "We just don't understand why you're being so cruel. Family doesn't cut each other off." The last line read, "We'll come by again tomorrow. You'll see us then." I folded the paper back up and called Martin. He picked up on the second ring. "Morning, Avery," he said, already sounding alert. "What's going on?" I explained everything. The messages, the knocks, the letter, the posts. "I think it's time to formalize this," he said. "You have grounds for a restraining order, harassment, defamation, attempted interference with employment. Are you ready for that?" My answer came without hesitation. "Yes." The paperwork moved faster than I expected. Martin filed within 24 hours, citing a mountain of evidence, screenshots, recordings, camera footage, every message they'd left behind. The court date landed 2 weeks out. Paige offered to come with me. I accepted. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. I went over the details again and again in my mind, the ICU texts, the credit card cancellations, the foreclosure, every moment that had brought us to this. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired, ready for it to be over. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant. When we entered the hearing room, they were already there. My parents sat side by side, dressed as if for church. Chase leaned against the wall behind them, his jaw tight. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Judge Elaine Porter was older, with the kind of presence that filled the room without raising her voice. She started by asking my attorney to present the evidence. Martin stood calm as ever and began laying out the timeline. When it was their turn, Dad went first. His tone was smooth, careful, rehearsed. "Your Honor, our daughter has misunderstood our intentions. We've only ever wanted what's best for her. She's been under a lot of stress." Mom dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, murmuring about how hard it had been watching her daughter drift away. Chase shifted behind them, muttering something I couldn't hear. Then the judge turned to me. "Ms. Dalton, would you like to respond?" I stood the folder of evidence heavy in my hands. "Yes, Your Honor." I walked forward and placed it on the table. Inside were screenshots of Dad's text from the ICU. "Maybe dying will make you interesting." Photos from their Vegas trip time-stamped. The fundraising page. Voicemails laced with threats. Security reports from my building documenting every incident in the lobby. "These aren't misunderstandings," I said quietly. "These are choices. They didn't just leave me when I almost died. They mocked me for it. And when I stopped paying for their lives, they tried to ruin mine." The room was still. Judge Porter flipped through the folder, her brow tightening. When she looked up, her expression had changed. "Temporary restraining order is granted effective immediately," she said. "A hearing for a permanent order will be scheduled within the month." Her gavel struck the block once, crisp and final. As we stood to leave, Mom reached for my arm. "Avery, please, we can work this out." I stepped back. "You made lawyers and judges necessary," I said quietly. "You could have chosen to stop. The bailiff guided them toward the door. I turned to Paige, who squeezed my hand once before we walked out together. Outside, the air was bright, almost too bright after the fluorescent stillness of the courtroom. I felt the tension that had lived in my shoulders for years begin to ease. That night, I sat by my window again, the city lights scattered like small fires, and realized something unexpected. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was light, free. For the next few weeks, I waited for the follow-up hearing. My phone stayed silent. No calls, no knocks, no messages. When the permanent order came through, no contact, no proximity within 500 feet, no online posts, it felt like the final brick in a wall I'd built one choice at a time. But freedom has a strange way of revealing what comes next. The day after the paperwork arrived, I woke without the usual knot in my stomach. My phone buzzed just once, a new number flashing on the screen. It wasn't them. It was Ben Carter, my old boss. "Avery," he said, "I know you've been through a lot, but there's an opportunity you should hear about." His voice carried the first hint of something I hadn't felt in months, a door opening somewhere I hadn't dared to look. I said yes to the meeting, not knowing it would change everything that came after. Ben's call lingered in my mind for the rest of that night. I hadn't expected opportunity to sound like familiarity. He'd been my supervisor at the firm where I first cut my teeth in cybersecurity, the one person who saw how I worked long after everyone else went home. When we met for coffee the next morning, he didn't waste time with small talk. "Avery," he said, setting a folder on the table, "there's a company that needs someone who can build security from the ground up." I gave them your name. I flipped through the pages. Argent Solutions, a rapidly growing tech firm with major government contracts. The role was Director of Cybersecurity. Twice my old salary, equity, full creative control. "You'd be leading a team," Ben added. "They're serious about investing in talent who actually knows what she's doing." 2 weeks later, I walked into Argent's headquarters. The space was all glass and quiet hums, screens pulsing with data feeds. Valerie Rhodes, the CEO, met me in the lobby. She was sharp but kind-eyed, a leader who noticed details. "We've heard about your work," she said. "You caught a breach no one else saw. We'd like you to build something that prevents that from happening here." I accepted on the spot. It felt less like starting over and more like stepping into the version of my life I'd been trying to reach for years. My first few months at Argent were a blur of code audits, hiring interviews, and late nights with a team that shared my obsession for precision. For the first time in a long time, people trusted me, not for what I could give them, but for what I could do. Valerie would stop by during evening shifts, coffee in hand, asking how I envisioned the system evolving. "You're building a legacy," she said once, watching a new firewall visualization light up on the monitor. The words stayed with me. Outside of work, the silence from my family remained steady. The restraining order had done what I couldn't force: distance. Paige still checked in, always a text before calling. "How's the new job?" she'd ask, then add something like, "Your mom's posting cryptic quotes again." I'd smile, grateful, but no longer reactive. When the anniversary of the court hearing passed, I realized I hadn't thought about them for an entire day. That was its own kind of milestone. By summer, my life had found a rhythm I didn't think was possible. I bought a small house on the north side of the city, a place with an open kitchen, wide windows, and enough yard for a dog. Rusty came home with me from a rescue shelter, a golden retriever with one white paw, and a habit of resting his head on my knee whenever I paused too long. He settled into my routines as if he'd always been there. The quiet that used to ache now felt like peace. It was Owen, my cousin, who told me how the rest of them were doing. We'd kept loose contact, just the occasional call, never gossip. One evening, he said, Chase is out of work again. Your mom's been posting about forgiveness, whatever that means, and your dad's doing warehouse shifts. I listened, stirring sugar into my tea. They're renting a one-bedroom now, he added. They keep saying things would have been fine if you hadn't cut them off. I didn't answer. Owen sighed. For what it's worth, Avery, you did what none of us could. I thanked him and changed the subject. The following week, he called again, half amused, half embarrassed. You're not going to believe this, he said. Your mom got caught shoplifting. Makeup and a wedge of imported cheese. I let out a slow breath. What happened? She blamed you, he said. Told the store manager it was your fault for abandoning her. But get this, the manager's daughter had been in the ICU last year. She wasn't buying it. Charges were dropped, but the story made the local news. I didn't say anything at first, just pictured the headline, "Local Woman Blames Daughter for Shoplifting Arrest." It was surreal, but in a way fitting. For years, image had been everything to her. Now it was unraveling on its own. While they were unraveling, my life kept unfolding in new directions. At work, Argent launched our first successful rollout of a nationwide network security platform, and Valerie called me into her office after the announcement. "You're not just leading this division anymore," she said, sliding an envelope across the table. Inside was a promotion letter, Vice President of Information Security. The title felt heavier than I expected. "You earned this," she said simply. That weekend, I stood on my back porch, watching the city skyline glow against the dusk. Rusty dozed beside me, the sound of crickets rising from the field below. Paige came by with takeout balancing cartons in one hand. "Look at you," she teased. "Executive life." I laughed. "Still feels like I'm catching up to myself." She raised her cup. "To peace, that doesn't need permission." We clinked plastic lids, the sound soft in the evening air. It wasn't all work and quiet, though. Over time, I started meeting people again through Paige's circle, at a local hiking group, and eventually at a fundraiser for women in tech. That's where I met Evan Brooks, a financial analyst with an easy smile and a way of listening that made silence comfortable. He remembered details, the kind of things most people let slip away. We started with coffee, then dinners that ran late, then weekends that stretched into something steadier. From the start, I told him about my family, every detail that mattered. He didn't flinch. "It sounds like you did the healthy thing," he said. "Most people never get out." His voice was calm, not pitying. For once, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. As the months passed, I realized how much life had shifted. My days were full work. I believed in a home that felt safe people who showed up without conditions. The ache that used to pulse quietly beneath everything was gone, replaced by something quieter, stronger. Nearly 2 years had passed since the Vegas weekend when I saw him. It happened in the frozen food aisle of a grocery store. I was comparing brands of pasta when I noticed a familiar shape a few rows over. My father stood by the freezer section, thinner, now hair grayer at the temples, a coupon booklet in his hand. For a moment, neither of us moved. When he looked up, recognition flickered across his face, followed by something else. Maybe shame, maybe exhaustion. "You look good," he said quietly. "Healthy." I nodded. "I am." He hesitated, shifting the coupons in his hand. "I know we messed up, Avery. I know we failed you when you needed us most. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I understand what we lost." His words came out slower than I remembered him ever speaking. No excuses, no anger, just truth. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "But understanding what you lost doesn't undo the damage." He nodded once, eyes down. "I know," he said. "I just hope someday you'll let us show you we've learned." I didn't promise anything. "Maybe someday," I said. "Right now, I'm focused on the family I'm building with people who care." When I walked away, I felt something unexpected. Not guilt, not bitterness, just the quiet ache of knowing some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. That night, sitting on the porch beside Evan and Rusty, the city lights stretching out below us, I thought about how far I'd come from that hospital bed, from the texts, from the silence that once felt like punishment. I didn't know what the future would bring, but I finally knew what I wanted it to look like, and none of it required permission from the people who once defined me. The weeks after that grocery store encounter passed quietly. It felt strange to know my father was living somewhere nearby, shopping in the same aisles, breathing the same air, yet the distance between us was wider than ever. I didn't tell anyone about seeing him, not Paige, not Evan. Some moments are too fragile to turn into conversation. Instead, I threw myself back into work. Argent's new project was expanding faster than any of us had predicted, and every day carried its own kind of noise: meetings, reports, updates, plans. It suited me. After years of reacting, I was finally steering something that mattered. Valerie called me into her office one afternoon to debrief after a successful security audit. "You've changed this place," she said. "The culture, the discipline, the trust, it all starts with leadership." I thanked her, but the compliment sank deeper than she realized. For so long I'd measured my worth by how much I could give others. Now I was building systems where accountability wasn't optional. It was the kind of work that reminded me how far I'd come. Home became the anchor I never had before. Rusty waited at the door every evening, tail sweeping the floor like a metronome. Evan often arrived an hour later carrying groceries or flowers, small gestures that felt steady and kind. On weekends, we hiked the ridge behind my house or drove out to the coast with Rusty in the back seat, the windows down. Life had softened in all the right places, but quiet doesn't erase memory, it only gives it room to breathe differently. Sometimes when I caught sight of the moonlight glinting off the fence line, I thought about the ICU, the antiseptic smell, the machines, the sound of my father's text arriving like a verdict. Those flashes didn't sting the way they used to. They were reminders, not wounds. I had built a life beyond their reach. One evening, as summer tilted toward fall, Evan and I hosted a small dinner for friends. Paige and her fiancé arrived early, bringing wine and the kind of laughter that fills every empty space. Conversations circled around work travel recipes, then shifted naturally toward families. Paige leaned back, smiling. "Do you ever hear from them?" she asked gently. I shook my head. Not since that day in the grocery store. Her smile faded a little, but she nodded. "Good. You deserve this calm." I knew what she meant. The absence of chaos had become its own kind of luxury. Later that night, after everyone left, I stood on the porch with Evan, the air cool and full of cicadas. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Just thinking how quiet it's been," I said. "Feels almost strange." He wrapped his arm around me. Sometimes peace feels unfamiliar at first. The truth of that settled between us. Weeks passed, each one softer than the last. Work thrived, home stayed warm, and my world began to feel whole in ways I hadn't imagined possible. But one night after a late shift, I opened my front door and saw a plain white envelope slipped under the mat. No name, no address. Inside was a single piece of paper with 3 words scrawled in familiar handwriting: "We're proud now." The words were uneven, written with a shaky hand. My stomach tightened, not in fear exactly, but in disbelief. I placed the note on the kitchen counter and stared at it under the light. There was no return address, no explanation. Just that message, small, almost pathetic, but haunting in its own way. I called Martin the next morning. He listened quietly as I read the note aloud. "Legally, they're still under restriction," he said. "Even indirect contact counts as a violation." I hesitated. "It doesn't feel threatening. Just off." "I understand," he said. "Still document it. Keep a copy. Send me a photo. We'll file it in case there's another incident." I did as he asked, sliding the original into a folder with the old court papers. When I shut the drawer, the faint smell of ink and paper reminded me how much distance was written between us. Evan found me there a few minutes later, the folder still open. "Everything okay?" he asked. I showed him the note. His expression tightened. "Want me to handle it?" I shook my head. "It's already being handled." He didn't press. He just rested a hand on my shoulder, a silent promise that I wasn't facing any of it alone. The weeks that followed felt strangely still. Part of me expected another letter, some attempt at contact, but nothing came. The quiet resumed, heavier now, but not unwelcome. Then one morning, I opened my email to find a message from an unfamiliar domain. It wasn't from them, but from a local journalist who covered human interest stories. She wrote that she'd been investigating small-town fraud cases and had come across public records from the Daltons' foreclosure. "Would you be open to discussing your experience?" she asked. "Your story could help others." I stared at the message for a long time before closing it. There was nothing left I wanted to explain. I'd already spent years trying to justify my choices to them, to myself, to anyone who asked. Now the only explanation I needed was the life I was living. That evening I sat outside with Rusty's head resting on my knee, the sunset spilling gold across the deck. The city below flickered to life, 1,000 windows lighting up one by one. I thought about how different my days looked now. I woke without panic, worked without fear, and came home to peace that didn't depend on permission. It struck me then that survival had turned into something deeper. It wasn't about fighting anymore, it was about living well enough that the fight lost its meaning. The version of me that once begged for approval no longer existed. What replaced her wasn't hardened or bitter, just whole. The letter stayed tucked away in the folder untouched. I never received another one. I sometimes wondered if that was their last attempt at rewriting the story, one small way of pretending it ended on their terms. But by then, I'd already written my own ending, a quiet, steady one that began with a decision to choose myself. As fall settled in and the air grew crisp, I realized the next chapter wasn't about escaping the past anymore. It was about building forward career home love, all grounded in the same truth. Peace was something I could create, not something they could give or take. I didn't know it yet, but the final test of that peace was still ahead, the moment when life would circle back and ask if I truly believed I was free. And when it came, I'd be ready to answer. It took nearly a year before I realized I had stopped looking over my shoulder. The legal file stayed locked away in a desk drawer gathering dust, while life kept filling in the spaces they had once occupied. Work stayed demanding in all the right ways, and home had settled into something resembling peace. Evenings were slower, Evan cooking, while Rusty lay at his feet, the sound of the radio low and steady. I didn't think much about my parents anymore. When I did, it was like recalling a story that had already ended. Then, one afternoon in early spring, my phone rang with a name I hadn't seen in years. Owen. I answered, surprised by the tightness in his voice. Avery. I thought you should hear this from me, he said. Chase was arrested last night. Some kind of fraud scheme with a guy he met online. The words came out clipped like he'd rehearsed them. They're saying he forged documents under someone else's business name. Dad's trying to bail him out, but... He trailed off. Mom's in the hospital. Panic attack or something close. I stood still, the sound of Evan washing dishes fading into the background. Owen exhaled. I don't know if you want to get involved, but I figured you should know. I thanked him, told him I appreciated the call, and hung up. For a while I just stood at the window watching the street below. I didn't feel anger or pity, just an old kind of tiredness I hadn't known still lived in me. That night I told Evan. He listened quietly, then said, Do you want to do anything about it? I shook my head. There's nothing left to do. They made their choices. He nodded once, and that was it. No judgment, no suggestions, just quiet understanding. A week later, another envelope arrived. This one official stamped from the county courthouse. I opened it on the kitchen counter, careful not to let my hands shake. Inside was a notice my name listed as a potential witness for Chase's defense. He'd told his public defender that I handled his financial accounts in the past. It wasn't a lie exactly, but it wasn't the truth anymore either. I called Martin as soon as I finished reading. Send me a copy, he said after I explained. You're not obligated to appear unless subpoenaed, and even then we can challenge it. Can he really do this? I asked. Try to drag me into it. He can try, Martin said, but the record's clear. You severed financial ties years ago. We'll respond before the deadline. Don't worry. I thanked him. Though worry was exactly what I felt. Not the kind that twists your stomach, but the quieter kind that lives in your shoulders. The one that whispers, Here they come again. For days after I carried that unease like a shadow. At work, I found myself double-checking my inbox, scanning for any message that might pull me back into the mess I thought I'd escaped. None came. When the court date arrived 2 months later, Martin confirmed the subpoena had been dismissed. You're clear, he said. They can't use your name. I felt the air return to my lungs. A week later, Owen called again. The charges stuck, he said. He took a plea deal, probation fine, some community service. Your dad's furious, says the system's out to humiliate them. I almost smiled at the irony, but kept my voice even. Thanks for letting me know. Owen hesitated. I saw your mom. She's not the same. Smaller, quieter. She asked about you. I didn't respond right away. What did you tell her? That you're happy, he said, and that you don't need saving. The next time I saw my parents' names, it was in a local news alert. A short article on a sentencing summary, no details beyond dates and charges. Still seeing their last name in print again felt strange, like catching your reflection in a window and not recognizing yourself. I closed the browser and went back to work. Spring turned to summer. The world kept moving. Rusty's fur began to gray at the edges, and Evan and I talked about taking a long trip, maybe somewhere quiet near the mountains. Life felt steady again. Then one afternoon, Valerie stopped by my office with a look I hadn't seen before. "You've done incredible work here," she said, "and we'd like to expand your role. How would you feel about leading our new security operations in Seattle?" The offer was generous promotion, relocation package, full creative freedom. I asked for a week to think it over. That evening, Evan and I sat on the porch watching the sky shift from orange to deep blue. "You've earned this," he said. "If you want to go, we'll go." I smiled, though something in me hesitated. "It feels like closing a circle," I said quietly, "leaving this city behind, all of it." He reached for my hand. "Maybe that's the point." A few days later, I accepted the position. We set the move for late fall. I spent the next months preparing training, my successor packing, saying quiet goodbyes to the city that had held both my unraveling and my recovery. When the last box was taped shut, I stood in the doorway of my house for a long moment, taking in the empty rooms. Before we left, I visited one last place, the small park near my old apartment. The same one I'd walked through during the worst nights when the calls and knocks never seemed to end. The air smelled like cut grass and rain. I sat on the bench listening to the hum of traffic and felt something I hadn't before: gratitude. Not for what they'd done, but for what I'd learned surviving it. When I returned home, Evan was waiting by the truck, Rusty's leash in his hand. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded. More than ever. We drove west into a sunset that looked like fire spreading across water. But even as the highway stretched out in front of us, I couldn't shake the sense that life had one more test waiting, one last reminder that peace wasn't something you just earned once. It was something you protected again and again. The move to Seattle felt like turning a final page. The air there carried salt from the bay, and the mornings came wrapped in mist that softened everything it touched. Evan and I found a small house on a quiet street, lined with maples, their leaves burning red by the time we moved in. Rusty trotted through every room, his tail brushing against new walls, as if marking them with approval. For the first few weeks, I felt like I was learning to breathe again, slowly, deeply, without waiting for the next alarm to sound. Work at Argent's new division came fast and steady. The office overlooked the water, and some evenings I'd stay long enough to watch the ferries move across the sound like slow glowing ghosts. The pace was different here, focused, respectful, quiet. Valerie visited during the launch and told me she wanted this branch to reflect the way I led, measured but strong. For the first time, I believed her. Outside of work, life took on its own kind of rhythm. Evan and I spent weekends exploring coastal trails, sometimes driving hours just to find a stretch of sand where the tide met the fog. He'd bring a thermos of coffee, and we'd sit in silence watching the sea roll in. The quiet no longer felt empty. It felt earned. Rusty always found the nearest stick and demanded his share of the day unbothered by anything that had come before. It was on one of those mornings, gray light, the ocean curling close, that I realized how far I'd come from the hospital room where everything began. I could still see it clearly if I tried the beeping monitors, the text that broke something inside me, the silence that followed. But that memory no longer owned me. It was just a marker on the map, proof that I had survived and rebuilt from the ashes. Not long after settling in, Owen called again. His voice was softer this time. "Your dad's been asking around," he said, "just to know if you're doing okay. Nothing more." I thanked him for telling me and said I hoped they were finding their own way. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but something close to release. I hung up and stood by the window watching the rain slide down the glass, feeling no anger, no need to respond, just peace. Months passed and seasons changed. Rusty started to slow down his muzzle, whitening his steps a little stiffer. Evan built a small ramp by the porch so he could climb up to his favorite spot again. I caught myself smiling more often at work, at strangers, at nothing in particular. My life was no longer built around what I had lost, but around what I was still building. One evening, while cleaning out old folders, I came across the last letter my parents had sent, the one with those 3 words, "We're proud now." I unfolded it carefully, reading it once, before tucking it back into the envelope. I didn't need to decide what it meant. Some stories don't end in apology or reunion. Some simply fade into understanding that what's gone was never yours to fix. Later that night, Evan joined me on the porch with 2 mugs of tea. The sky was clear and the city below glimmered faintly in the distance. "Do you ever miss them?" he asked quietly. I thought for a long moment before answering. "No," I said. "I miss what I thought family was supposed to be." He nodded, resting his hand over mine. "Then you built your own." His words landed like truth I'd already known. As Rusty curled at our feet, I looked out over the skyline and realized that justice hadn't come from a courtroom or a sentence. It had come from learning to live without waiting for permission to be free. My parents had lost the best parts of me long before I stopped paying their bills. What I had now was everything they never understood: peace, purpose, and people who stayed because they wanted to, not because they needed something. I still keep that folder locked in my desk, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of what I survived. It sits there quietly, just paper and ink, now no longer carrying weight. The real record of my life lives in smaller things, the mornings that start in calm, the sound of laughter filling a house that feels safe, the simple joy of choosing myself and not apologizing for it. If there's one thing this whole journey taught me, it's that sometimes the best revenge isn't anger or retribution. It's peace. The kind you build with your own 2 hands, brick by quiet brick, until one day you look around and realize you've built a life no one can take from you. So wherever you are listening tonight, if you've ever been used, forgotten, or made to feel small, remember this: you're allowed to start over. You're allowed to choose peace even if you have to build it alone. And if this story found you at the right time, share it with someone who needs that reminder too. Because peace isn't luck. It's the life you decide to protect every single day.